I'm Tana Lynch. I'm the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Thank you for joining us for our October monthly meeting. And we'll start with introductions like we always do. So I already said who I am. Nolan.
I'm Nolan Salix, the restoration specialist.
Hi, I'm Carly Maisel, and Leland Floyd, I'm going to be with Lake Park.
With what's on NRC, Joe Wolf, ranchers.
County resident.
County resident. Dean Peterson, rancher, on the board. Howard Carter, resident.
John Jackson, Peter County Commissioner and former ranger. Dave Duffy, a citizen.
Ian Moore, Big Sky Land Management and working lands for wildlife.
Jim Hagan, I was the rancher for doing everything on the board.
Vanna Boccadori, Fish Wildlife and Parks.
Tom Bowler from Butte.
Debbie Bowler, Butte.
All right, we're on Zoom. Looks like we've got Pedro and Jim Griffin. Hi, Jim. In. All right. So first up is our stream flow report from Lutz.
Like I said, that's DNRC hydrologist on the Big Hole. This will be the October. Kind of rounding out stream flow for the year, and we just started a new water year this year, so. October 1st is the beginning of water year 2026, so we'll have some snow and precipitations. This is the map of all the stream gauges in the Big Hole, USGS and DNRC owned. So section 1, this is at the wisdom gauge, this is the USGS gauge, 46 as of this morning.
What is, just doesn't mean to interrupt.
Sure.
How does that compare to other years at this point? Pretty normal?
So next month, I'm gonna do an end of the year roundup and compare that to 21, 24.
I can wait.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do like an end of the year synopsis of this year compared to some of our years that we've had recently. So. Section 2, this is at the DNRC gauge there above Wise River. This morning is at about 211 CFS. And as you'll see, this recent precip and snow, we've had a recent jump here earlier, the first of the month. And section 1 and 2 are now open to fishing. And then from section 3 through 5, those are now in spawning closure. So that'll be in closing October 1st to March 30th. Section 3 is at Maiden Rock. This is 300 CFS as of this morning. Section 4 at Melrose, we're sitting at 311, and Glen, we're at 321. Again, all that precip came in the first of the month. And then section 5, this is there at the below Hamilton Ditch, USGS gauge, that was 306 this morning. So like I said, new water year. We're only 15 days into the water year, so take these numbers with a grain of salt. A little bit above average, the median for this time of year, so 189%. But like I said, we're only 14 days into this, so all that snowpack that we got from around the first and then earlier this weekend, it's a good sign for hopefully more to come. And then precip is about the same. 167%. Like I said, these are pretty inflated. It's the beginning of the water year. So 2-week outlook, a little bit above average temperatures, but we're also seeing this above average precipitation. On the next slide, this is our seasonal temperature outlook, and similar trends to what we're seeing right now. We're in considered La Nina conditions right now. So traditionally that's more precip in this region of the United States, which is good and it's expected to persist pretty much end somewhere around February or January, and it'll transition possibly into ENSO neutral. All that means the winter will start off wetter and transition into normal conditions by the end of it. So This is also a model, so take that with a grain of salt as well. Will change every week. This is the drought monitor. This has not changed at all since last time I showed it to you. We're still classified as D2 severe drought conditions, so. I think that's about it. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yep.
I think you're next, right, Pedro?
Yep. My screen sharing's off though, so
There you go. Should be able to know.
I can do it now. All right. Let's do. Oh, I gotta open it first. Hold on, give me a second. All right. What's that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this first slide, there's a lot on it. Let me try to move this Zoom thing out of the way. I guess what I'm trying to communicate here in this slide, there's been a lot of conversations, basically from the beginning of the year, you know, when the federal kind of funding scenario really shifted on us. A lot of groups like ours kind of got together and felt the need to get together and start talking. With the shifting scenario, obviously, we're sort of asking the question, first, sort of, is everybody feeling the same thing? What does this look like? How are we all adapting? It was a little bit of ED therapy going on, but then also exploring kind of what are the opportunities here given this shift. So I've been in a bunch of conversations, specifically one with the Blackfoot Challenge and being kind of led by Bill Milton in the Winnett area. And we're trying to consolidate kind of the shared values and needs of landowner-based working lands groups in Montana to see if there's a collective voice that we can summon up and take action with. And so some of those questions that I've been kind of exploring is, what does conservation leadership look like for us? And some of the big items involved with that, you know, policy changes and shifts and influence that we could potentially exert on governing officials, the pooling of funding or, you know, capturing more private dollars, and how do you do that? What are the needs of kind of the resources and the landscape that we're also obviously laser focused on? And then there's also the question of, are there community needs related to resource enhancement, right? So there's some groups in Montana that have focused really intently on things like, you know, having a community building, or I think of the Winnett Aces, they got a lot of money and attention to build up a community center and house a daycare for kids. And that type of thing is the type of key resource that keeps people living in that area. So there's a lot of these kind of issues going on. I know the Watershed Committee and our governing board is intent on staying focused on resource needs and resource enhancement. And I totally agree with that. But there are some opportunities there to create more of a collective voice. So at the very bottom, you'll see kind of Big Hole Watershed is our focus, obviously. But is there enough shared sort of values among these working groups to make more of a regional influence, potentially affecting policy decisions and get the ear of decision makers, right? With all the water needs that we have in the Big Hole, that's another key thing that we can leverage some of the opportunities and a lot of the research and science that we're funding to try to get us there. So in the course of all this work, these two quotes really stuck out to me. I hate reading quotes that are already on a screen. The first one on the left, you know, really talks about, it's Lyndon Johnson, something he said when he signed the Wilderness Act, leaving people a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about what he meant by in the beginning. And then in contrast to that, this dissertation that I found by a woman named Lila June Johnson, who's central in sort of this idea of bioregional organization, really making the clear point that Native people were not scattered nomads hoping to find a berry to eat or a deer to hunt, that they were very actively and consciously manicuring our biomes, designing and using land management techniques to create all of the biodiversity that we have inherited and newcomers to the land, relative newcomers to the land, have inherited. All this to say that stewardship and land management is a big part of how we need to approach moving forward and getting the resources and the tools to continue to do that. So I just wanted to put those two quotes up there, and I welcome, thoughts in that direction. We'll definitely be discussing this type of thing with the board moving forward. And, happy to, if anyone has any kind of thoughts on this when I finish, happy to engage in some of that conversation. So that's been a lot of my time, has been a lot of conversations around those. I think they've been really interesting. Okay, moving more on to kind of nuts and bolts of things that we've been working on. I'm sorry that this Zoom thing is really in the way. Wish I had a better way of getting it out of the way. What's that?
The little box that shows you, we mean?
Oh, is that all you're seeing? Because I'm seeing like this
Yeah.
whole, oh, perfect.
No, there you go.
I'm seeing this whole audio, video more anyway.
No, we don't see that.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, just so on the left, just giving you a little snapshot of where we're at kind of spending wise and what we've been able to put on the ground this year so far. There's a lot more to come. There's still a lot of invoices coming in and going out. Not too shabby for a year where we started most of it down in terms of our capacity and kind of going on maternity leave and me obviously being remote, but we're still able to get a lot of work done on the ground. On communication side of things, this is a point, I don't know how many board members we have in the room. I've sent out a notice. The FWP has put out an environmental assessment for a beaver translocation protocol. And what that will allow is the agency to translocate beaver anywhere within a Huck 10 watershed. So that would be a Huck 8 watershed, sorry. So that would be the entire big hole. If you have a problem beaver, you could be able to grab it and establishes a protocol to take that beaver and in a non-lethal fashion, house it, quarantine it for a certain amount of time, and then move it to somewhere where it could be useful for water storage and habitat creation. So unless I hear any dissenting voices, it sounded so far like the Watershed Committee was willing to put in a letter in support of that EA. Do I hear or see any dissenting opinions here among governing board members? Tanner, let me know if there's anything in the room. And if not, I'll thumbs ups all around. Awesome. Part of this translocation EA is that 4 sites across Montana have been selected for the potential first pilot translocations. And one of them is going to be up in the Moose Creek area in the Highlands. Nolan's been up there several times, just had a meeting today with the Nature Conservancy. We've been working closely with them and the Forest Service and FWP to kind of prep some of the first translocation spots and going through that whole process. We're happy to be pioneering this work. That's going to be pretty exciting. That said, we are looking for some nuisance beaver. So anybody, and ideally close by, I think the ideal scenario would be that we find an area where you actually do have nuisance beaver that you'd be happy for us to come and grab for you, get them out of there, and we'll go put them to good use up in Moose Creek. You can maybe talk to Vanna if anybody wants to reach out to Vanna there in the room. If you have any ideas, I've got some ideas from conversations. I've shared those already, but Vanna's there. Pull her ear if you have some thoughts on that. See, moving on, there's been a lot of drought plan discussions. This was a difficult year, obviously, and when we have difficult years, we have a lot of opinions and people start second guessing our plans and start coming up with ideas on how things could be changed. We obviously had an unfortunate situation with some fish kill, and in the attempts to gather data, and all of that was well documented in the newspapers. So lots of conversations going on around that, and we look forward to convening the drought committee in early winter and go over a lot of those ideas. So happy to have discussions about that as well. Lastly, another conversation that's been slightly ongoing, it's still very sort of tentative, is we've been contacted by and talking to these folks by a company called Hydrogreens. And what they do, they provide a sprouted grain cattle feed product that requires very minimal water and is being proposed as a form of supplement for cattle feed in that could potentially substitute for some irrigated pasture with a lot of decreased water use associated with that. So interesting conversations to just, we're keeping every tool in the toolbox that we can until they are either determined to not work or to be something viable, right? Wanted to bring your attention as well to an event being hosted tomorrow night at the Hitching Post in Melrose. I was made aware of this very recently, so I wanted to make sure to get it in here. This is a company that is using, I believe it's sort of drone-based cloud seeding, and they want to present on their technology and their work. They know about the pilot study, feasibility study that we did in the Big Hole for cloud seeding, and are excited to share their particular technology and get to know folks in the area that might be interested. So if you can, tomorrow night at the Hitching Post, 6 o'clock, they will be hosting a dinner there. The company's name is Rainmaker. And I think if you have any questions, I think feel free to reach out to myself or Tana. I don't have a lot more details other than what I was just got through the email. And then I've got a list of funding that we have gone after, have already submitted, or are going after. And it's a long list. I'll just kind of leave it up there. I'm not going to go through every one of them. As always, a lot going on, a lot on our plate. It's been great to have Nolan and Carly pitching in, getting used to the grant game, just raising our capacity to be able to go after these important funding sources. All right, any questions on any of that so far? Otherwise, I'm gonna move on. Okay, hearing none, and fairly soon here, I'm insulating Nolan a little bit from having to do these restoration presentations, but sometime soon here, when he's fully caught up to speed, he'll be giving these talks. Hang on to your hats. I'm not going to go through every one of these. The important one that I'm happy to finally announce is the landowner agreement with the Elkhorn Preserve. I finally got that inked today. So that preps the groundwork for us to now be able to put out some bids for some fencing to put up along the Big Hole right there on the Elkhorn Preserve Lazy S Ranch, and get about, in total, it'll be, I think we're putting in about 1.5 miles of new fencing. And there's a lot of fencing needs in that area for the riparian. So I'm excited to get that project going. We've got that funded through the DEQ, their 319 program. Also got 2 Army Corps permits secured for the Wise River Club. We have one project to relocate Smart Creek down to where it used to run and off of the Wise River Club property. And that'll require 3 big beaver dam analog structures to move that creek where it needs to be. It took a while to kind of get that through the Army Corps. So we're eager to move that project forward. And the Campershire Riparian project also, I think Nolan met with the contractor today. We're trying to work on getting the first parts of that project off the ground, and then going back to Future Fisheries Program to get the remaining funds that we'll need for that project in their next cycle here coming up in November. I think I'll leave it at that for all of those projects. As you see, we're all over the watershed. And I'll just keep the beaver and dynamite thing up there because it looks great. We did blast some of these beaver translocation sites. Really interesting kind of nuance of this beaver work is creating sort of muddy areas that when you do get beaver in, or even people acting like beaver, that you're able to harvest mud and sod to patch up and make a really solid beaver dam. So part of that work was to just to clear out and create a deep enough hole so that when the beaver go in there, they have a deep enough pond to settle into. So a lot of those, again, a lot of projects. These are all kind of more in design and scoping phases. So still plenty on our plate there. And then lastly, I'll just highlight for us our Smith Sage Springs Phase 2 project. I wanted to give you all a closer look at what's going on there. So on the left, you'll see the location of Smith Sage Springs. This was our restoration project on the left. And then Phase 2 is the landowner actually brought it to our attention that the entire system that we restored actually gets picked up by his ditch. And that's what you'll see on the right. So this is the downstream end of that whole system. It gets picked up by a ditch. You can right in the middle there, you can kind of see how the ditch creates this backwater, and that water never actually connects all the way to the North Fork of the Big Hole. So Phase 2 is designing a siphon that will go under the channel and then reconnect that whole system to a side channel of the North Fork of the Big Hole, and then eventually into the North Fork. And then we'll have full connectivity between this restored area and the Big Hole River for fish passage, basically. We already have a starter amount of money we have all the money for the design and a good chunk of money, 6 figures, for the construction. And what we're going to do, I'm showing in this slide, is phase that construction. So I'll walk you through it here kind of from the left. There's a highway. We're gonna put in a new culvert there to improve fish passage. And then towards the middle, this is the ditch siphon area. It's a big ditch. It'll be about 67 CFS that will get siphoned and naturalize the stream channel around that ditch. We had several proposed alternatives and side channels that we could have selected. So we went out with our engineers, Confluence Consulting, had to do a bunch of site recon, and have landed on the preferred side channel option, which is where this purple arrow is, which is pretty much a straight shot to this existing side channel, where the red arrow is pointing to, and then there's a picture down there. We've got to do some stream work to block off, maintain all of the flows into that channel. And then currently all the water is backed up by this berm. That's number 3 there in the blue box. This berm, it's an access for the ranch. We're going to have to pop a culvert into there and continue to run his ditch over the culvert on that berm. So as with all these projects, they seem easy when you're just looking at a map, and then they get complicated really, really fast once you get into it. But not a problem. I think it's still an exciting project, and we'll have finished designs and cost estimates by the end of the year, and start going out to bid for at least the first phase of this project work. And I think that's all I got. That is all I got. Any questions?
All right, and the steering committee next then.
Steering committee hasn't done much since the hurricanes. Haven't had any big issues. We met with Pedro and Melanie Mount on these last few months in Peru. But as we look down the road, we have to follow it. That's right, well.
And that's been from and we thought Carl maybe start doing a comms presentation at some point too. Don't wanna put up too much on these guys as they're just joining us. So, I should say your name wrong, it's Natesel? Natesel, okay, I'm sorry, I hate saying people's names. I'll do better with that. So Carly is our new communications specialist. She worked for us over the summer as a contractor, and then we hired her on last month. We're really excited to see, well, excuse me, what we've already seen has been great, but we're excited to continue to see what she can do for us. And so she's doing some video production for us, social media and marketing, among other things, and has been helping us set up a store for branded merchandise. Oh. So there's a video, Carly made if it will play.
This year is a poor water year, and a lot of people depend on this river, and we've had a pretty cooperative approach. We irrigate out of the hole, and we are trying to calibrate and learn more about the quantity of water that we divert and how much we use on the fields, and understand the ditch loss, understand how to measure water and the best use of water.
You don't use some, use the big collection committee for measuring some water. And the whole goal of this is to measure your stream flow, so we can tell the local ranchers how much water they're using, how much water they can use, and how much water is being used just throughout their ditches that they fill off and they call river. This helps the landowners that use the river and the fishermen responsibly use water in a way that keeps stakeholders healthy.
It will give us a lot of information so we can very accurately tell what we're using. It's helped us learn a lot about what we need to do to keep water in the river. Yeah, so just be nice to have the information to say that we are only using a small amount of actual right that we have to use.
Sorry about the echo. Yeah, so Carly's been putting together a lot of great stuff for us, getting some great responses. And we're really excited about our new Shopify store. Come on, go big. Okay. So you can find it on our website, bhwc.org, and just click on shop to support. And we've got a lot of gear up there already, and we'll be adding more. We've got hats, sweatshirts, water bottles. And if there's anything specifically that anyone would like to see on there, just let us know. And so, okay, communications and press. There hasn't been quite as much lately. There was an article in the Montana Standard about the fishing economy. One about reopening the river. There were a couple, I didn't put them on here, but there were a couple op-eds about reopening the river, just about the status of the river. And then there was an article, it was in the Bozeman Chronicle, but you can find it for free in the Montana Free Press about the lawsuit against FWP for supposedly not enforcing their in-stream flow rights. So all of these will be in the minutes if you want to read them, or you can reach out to me. I'll send you the link too. And so we're sending out our weekly drought updates via both email and text to let people know the status of the river by section. And and you probably are aware, but the section 2 is now open, section 1 is closed, and then section 3, 4, and 5 are on spawning closure. And so our wildlife program, our carcass removal and composting program is pretty much put to bed for the winter. We are planning to do carcass removal spring 2026. I didn't put this on the slides, but I haven't even told Pedro yet, but our carcass driver resigned the other day, so we will be looking to hire a new driver and manager for our compost site. So if you know anybody, send them my way or just let them know. And then our range rider program operates July 1st through September 30th. So Chet monitored grazing allotments in the upper Big Hole for us again this year, checking on livestock condition and predator presence, with the hopes of deterring depredation and getting ranchers reimbursed for their losses when they happen and can be confirmed as being done by a wolf or grizzly. And we did purchase a used 4-wheeler for the program this year because, well, the one we'd been using for about 11, actually it was Chet's, he'd been using it for about 11 years and was just falling apart, and so we were able to buy one. None of our grant sources cover it, so we are accepting donations to offset the cost of the 4-wheeler, which was $8,000. But Chet's very happy with it. And so here's just a quick summary of our program this year. There was quite a bit of predator presence, wolves, bears, and mountain lions. There were 0 confirmed depredations on enrolled allotments this year. So there's a lot of text here, but the wolves were found in recurring locations in between Hamby, Engelcard, and Little Lake Creek. Chet had a few in-person encounters with black bears and one memorable sighting of a black bear sow and her 3 cubs. He was pretty excited about this year. And like I said, lots of wildlife out there. He documented tracks in several places and thinks that there is a potential single wolf or small pack. And then bear encounters. He encountered several black bears this year and got some photos of grizzly bears as well. There are at least 8 instances of wolf tracks, 2 in-person wolf sightings. Wolves were photographed. This is 2 occurrences. I think it was one of that. Anyway. So there's a consistent predator presence, as there typically is each year. Lots of wolf activity observed, several bear encounters, and we got a summary of the statistics. Oops. And so going back, so this is I think it's like the 14th year of this program. And we are looking at, we'll be doing it again next year. We're looking at potentially starting a little earlier if that's a need that our producers have, because one of our funding sources wants us to expand the program. We were also able to do that this year by adding a couple of new allotments to the program. So yeah, it gets harder and harder to prove that our program is the reason that there are no depredations happening. But we like to think it is. So, and the producers that are enrolled in it definitely see value in the program. So that's what I've got. Is there any new or any questions on wildlife?
I guess I'll make the comment that like where the grizzly bear tracks are or were all summer and a lot of the wolf activity. The one rancher hasn't come in with all his cattle, but all the cows that have come in have had calves on them, which is not expected with that kind of predator activity in here.
Like you'd expect the calves to be.
Well, normally the calf on.
Yeah.
But he's still out. I think 6 or 7 pairs at this point.
Okay. So, yeah, that's the other thing. I said no confirmed depredation, so sometimes they just disappear and, unfortunately we can't help producers get reimbursement if they're just gone. We need to show that they were killed by a wolf or a grizzly bear. So. Did you think bad, Jim?
Not on wildlife, other things.
Oh, okay. Next is, well, if that's all for wildlife, next is new business, so.
I just like the steering committee, welcome our new project manager, our communicator. These projects show what can be done in a positive way, rather than we have to pull all the folks that are being so negative, turn them around and encourage them to be positive and work as a team, as a community. And the communication of that is huge. You know, we can do all we want, but we don't show people what we're doing. It's like, it's effective. The other issue is cloud seeding. Won't be there Thursday night, I have a conflict, but I've talked to a few folks. They're talking about using drones. That's kind of a new way to look at it. I talked to Michael Downey a couple of days ago. He's the DRC guy, they did the feasibility study. And it showed that there's some potential in the big hole. And so we have to develop that potential. So we got 300,000 to do the feasibility study. And now we know where we have to go, where we want to put our time and money. And we have to determine what tool we use, whether they be drones or remote seeders or a combination thereof, or airplanes, and that depends kind of what items. And so 34 states at this point have started to look at passing legislations to prohibit geoengineering. And that's a direct result of chemtrail, contrail, conspiracy theories. The governor was pretty silent on this, and so it's important that this committee, along with the fisheries people, the tribal and urban sportsmen, get together and put some pressure on Geo40 and meet with him and make sure that he truly understands what we're trying to do. And when this is all said and done, if we get cloud seeding in Montana, we can work under the current law and do a pilot program. But a full funded cloud seeding program has to be collaborative. It'll have to change the law to allow that to happen. So it's very important that we do our job well. But first of all, we have to decide how we're going to do it. Rainmakers are one of the people that are interested. You know, they're just trying to get their business. But there's some very seasoned people out there in regards to providing contract work. And it helps with see these clouds if they're there. Idaho Power last year shut their seeders down periodically because there just wasn't any moisture in the clouds. There's no moisture there, there's no cloud seeding. So we're gonna have to put some pressure on the governor, and we're gonna have to find some other seed money, kind of make this a collaborative approach and not just work with the legislature with our hands out. We should come with a little money in our hand to start with. And we're hopeful that we can get this done on the next legislature to get the money that we need to do this pilot study. So we'll be meeting with the governor and we'll try to get the steering committee to get behind us, to give us the go ahead to meet with him, and he came down here, so he knows who the hell we are. So that's just the pitch I have in regards to cloud seeding and one tool in the toolbox that is feasible.
You said 34 states are looking at passing legislation to prevent what kind of engineering?
Well, it's called geoengineering,
Geoengineering.
and weather qualification is one part of that. Geoengineering isn't really practiced too much, but it's where you might put salt up in the air to reflect the sun rays to cool the earth. But that's all scientific, but the contrail people believe that the jets up above us are spreading chemicals. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. But social media is really having an impact on how people think. And So that's something we have to battle and have to go in with good information. I heard this. The Rainmaker gentleman, I met with his partner. And we talked to the head of the NRC, Casper, I believe. And he talked at a legislative hearing. And had a lot of information and pretty much. Well, anyone with common sense that geoengineering, or not, that contrails and contrails are a reality. He just said, that's crazy. And he had the facts to back it up. So we shouldn't discount anyone in this battle and try to get some common sense back into managing the natural resources. And, we have a water cycle and it starts with clouds. So you should not be ignoring those clouds because you can encourage them to give us more precipitation through the sediment.
All right, any new business? No, all right, well, let's take a short break then. All right, real quick, before we hear from Vanna, we just want to take a second to introduce Ian Moore, is that right? With Big Sky Land Management. He's gonna just take like 5 minutes and tell you a little bit about what he does. Yeah, conifer encroachment.
Oh. Forget how I got in touch with Pedro originally, but I ended up finding you guys, and then met Jim here yesterday at the fundraising conference there in Dillon. And I'm out at Ennis, Montana, south of Ennis, between Ennis and Cameron. I'm a director for a forestry and logging company there, and I primarily work with nearly 100% private lands with producers from Miles City all the way up to Plains, Montana, into northern Wyoming and southern Idaho, working on conifer encroachment, quantifying impacts around it in addition to doing the contracting. I've got a partnership with Working Lands for Wildlife in the Terra Dynamics Lab at University of Montana. That's Scott Morford, Dave Nagel. They're involved with sagebrush conservation and sagebrush partnerships here in Montana. And kind of what we're doing with them is individual ranch mapping for quantifying water losses in terms of acre feet, forage production from conifer encroachment. And I've got some of those maps here. If after the meeting, anybody wanted to take a look at some of the work that we're doing. Also working on bigger landscapes, entire watersheds and sub-watersheds as well, trying to take those impacts for water loss and forage and kind of get some innovative financing going for conservation and trying to figure out a way to get this stuff solved. That's kind of what we're working on. So yeah, feel free to grab me. I've got maps here and I'd be happy to talk with anybody about it after the meeting's over.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. All right, and now the main show, we're gonna hear from Vanna Boccadori with FWP, all about pronghorns.
Way to go, Vanna!
So I know you've heard me speak about pronghorn before, and so some of the stuff tonight might be a little bit of a repeat. But what I wanted to do tonight was to kind of branch off of just giving you trend information on the numbers that I counted and give you a little bit more in depth. The animal itself, I almost called this like Pronghorn Appreciation Day or something, because they really are cool critters. And so I'm gonna spend part of the time just kind of sharing some of the really interesting features that pronghorn have, and then talk about some of the management in the upper big hole. So are you gonna be my? Okay, so you have seen probably some of these maps before, but in 20, we collared several does on their winter range down in Argenta, Horse Prairie, Bannock Country, put collars on them and then tracked them out for the next 3 years. And we kept replenishing collars with does each year. So we tried to maintain at least 30 does with collars on them for those 3 years. And we wanted to see what were their movement patterns, what were their seasonal ranges. And so let me have you focus over here first. This is all the antelope that you see in the Big Hole and all the way up to Mount Hagen, they all winter down here by Dillon. So in Horse Prairie and Bannock and Argenta and just kind of west of town. So this is their winter range, and these blobs in the different colors are calculated from all the movements of the different collared animals that we had and kind of put together. And so these are outlines of where those animals with the collars really concentrated, and they're very gregarious animals. So even if you only have 30 collared and there might be 800, you're pretty much getting an idea where all 800 animals are. So this is their winter range. It's a pretty tight area. And then if you move up here to the spring, once the spring hits, they start to spread out. So you get some that will actually stay on their winter range, they're non-migratory. And then you've got some that will actually go over Bloody Dick Divide into the horse or into a hairpin area. You have some that go up into the grasshopper. You have some that stay over just west of the interstate, west of Dillon. And in that Argenta country, Nolan's backyard. And then here's another pocket of them in the Big Hole, probably like in that Fox Gulch, Dean, would that be right? That area. And then from the battlefield all the way up to Mount Hagen. Mount Hagen is their northernmost part of where they will migrate to in the spring. And the interesting thing is, if you just kind of focus on these blobs, they don't really change where they go in the summer. They don't really change where they go in fall. Once they leave their tight little area in the winter time and they spread out in the spring, pretty much they're using those same areas in the summer and in the fall. And then everything contracts, and it probably happened on Monday when we got that snow. All of these animals, they just filter right down through the Big Hole or up the Big Hole, and they'll end up on their winter range again. So those are their seasonal range maps on the left, and then on the right, the orange is the combination of the movements, the GPS locations for all those does that we had collared over the course of the study. So it just kind of gives you an idea of their pathways, not just where they end up, but where their pathways are. And it was amazing for me to see how consistent their movements are. You know, they fill in this whole area in the winter time, and it just depends on the winter weather. You know, first year we found them down in Horse Prairie, and then the next year, the majority of them were in Argenta. So just like it shows on that blue blob over there. So they kind of make use of all this high desert country for their winter range. And then you'll get, you know, they'll poke right up into the Bloody Dick area in the summertime. They'll fill in all the spaces in the grasshopper. The hairpin ranch really holds a lot, and down by the Davis. And all this country on the east side of the highway really isn't, I don't believe, the divider. It's more that this is your higher bench country.
It's your sagebrush, there's no sagebrush.
Exactly, yeah. And this is more of that swampy country. So it's not that the road is a barrier. I don't want anybody to leave here thinking that. And it's interesting, they have one crossover point right here, and I've been meaning to get down on the river and kind of see. It must be just a naturally narrow spot in the river, but they all seem to cross here. They're not crossing down behind the cemetery. And then that bench by the battlefield right here, and in that Sage Springs area where you guys are doing some work, there's a whole bunch of antelope in that country. And then as you go all the way up to Mount Hagen. And then one year, we did have one collared doe, and whatever group she was with, she went this way, did something completely novel. So novel as far as what we had seen, but probably not for her in that group. And unfortunately, so she got up here not too far from Fairmount Hot Springs. And then on her return trip, something happened and she was on mortality somewhere right out. So anyway, just to kind of give you an idea of what their movements are and how they use the country. Yeah. This is a distance of a good 90 miles that they travel every year, so that's kind of cool to see that. Right. Okay, so if you kind of remember that picture of what we just saw on the previous slide, and of course, prior to having any sort of color information, back in the 80s, when the boundary for the hunting districts were drawn, pretty much taking that same, so the biologists at that time were really paying attention even without that technology, because you know, they drew 329, which is all that winter range. And then 318, this is the boundary of 318 hunting district for pronghorn back in the 1980s. And you notice they left out this whole area, which on the previous map, we just showed that there's not a lot of use in that country, where it's more of the swamp country. So in the 1980s, it was managed as this wintering population down here, and those pronghorn that stayed and didn't move off of there for the summertime. And then the migratory portion. And in 1996, pretty much the same thing, other than just, let's go ahead and include that. No reason not to include that. There's some antelope standing there, probably one or two people prior to 96 harvested an antelope over here and then got in trouble because it technically was out of the district. And so then we probably just said, go ahead and draw the whole district, the whole West Big Hole into the district. In 2007, when Craig Fager was the biologist in Dillon, one of the things that he and I did was, in recognition that those pronghorn will move from that horse prairie band country up into the Big Hole. And then depending on when we get that first snow that drives all those pronghorn back down to their winter range, hunters with a 318 tag may not have an opportunity to harvest anything, because those pronghorn will begin their journey and leave and head back down to 329 if that first snowstorm happens before the opening of the season. So we combined those two districts into one and just called it all 318s. Back in 2020, we split them back up again. And the reason for that is that when we have them all combined, if there was a winter snow that pushed all the antelope out of the country to the north and into the south end, then all the hunters were going straight down into that Bannock horse prairie country. And if there wasn't a snowstorm, they were still going down into that Bannock horse prairie country, because it just was more public land, easier access, I guess. And so what was happening is this non-resident portion of the population was getting hit really hard and driving that population down. So as is the case in most of our districts, it is not so much to manage the animals, it's to distribute the hunters and where the harvest is occurring. So it wasn't the solution for everything to split them back into two districts, because we're still dealing with the issue of, if we get a good snow, it pushes everything out of 318. But until we come up with something different, that's where we're at right now. So I fly these districts every other year. So I just flew 318 this year. And during those flights, I'll do it in a fixed wing plane, low elevation. We'll count all the pronghorn that we find, and we'll classify the individuals in those herds down to doe, yearling buck, adult buck, and then fawns. We do those flights in July, and we found that if we do them too early in July, when you're seeing individual does off by themselves, and they're normally a very gregarious herd-bound animal, that tells you that they still have their fawns cached. They're hiding them, they haven't joined back into the big herd. And so we would get poorer counts during that time, because you're not seeing all those fawns. So we wait until at least mid-July, and that's usually enough time where those fawns are at their mother's heel and they're back in the big group, and we get better counts. And then as far as the management goes with hunting season, we have a combination of either sex licenses and also doe fawn licenses. And I'm gonna talk more about that as we get further into it. Okay, so here's where I kind of want to step away from the typical management and trends and the data. And just kind of give you some background information on pronghorn. And just what a very interesting animal they actually are. So the pronghorn that we have today, they are relics from the Pleistocene era. And at that time, there are actually several different types from the fossil record. They were able to tell there are different cousins, if you will, to the present day pronghorn antelope. And those have all gone extinct. The only one that has remained is the pronghorn that we know of today. Advance that. I know you're so embarrassed.
I was staring at that guy at the bottom right with the horn.
Yeah, they're definitely pretty unusual. So just as there were relatives, if you will, to the pronghorn that were back in the Pleistocene 10,000 plus years ago, also there were different predators than what the pronghorn of today have. So you had these dire wolves, you had short-faced bears, you had cheetahs, saber-toothed tigers, and these are all on the North American continent, you know, back millions of years ago. And that's probably one of the reasons that the pronghorn has gotten the ability to run as fast as it does, because it can outrun any of our predators that it has today. But some of these predators that it had back thousands of years ago were a lot faster than what we have today. So, I mean, again, obviously they're all extinct. We don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore, but. And as far as present day predators go, really a healthy pronghorn adult doesn't have much to worry about. The young are really susceptible at times to golden eagle, coyotes, usually coyotes are probably the bigger one of those, and occasionally mountain lion. But an adult pronghorn today does, you know, can outrun, a healthy one can outrun just about anything, so. All right, what else? So this is the scientific name, Antilocapra americana. It's the only survivor of that family. Its closest relative is giraffe. Just looked at the fossil record tree, and that's the closest relative. Pronghorn are only found on North America. They're not found in any other continent. And Antilocapra means brightness of the eye, which is fitting because they have such large eyes. I brought a skull and I put it on the back table too, so if you want to look at it. The eyes aren't in it, but you can look at the eye sockets. So, okay. And they really aren't antelope, they are pronghorn. They're not related to antelope like you think about in Africa. Those antelope are in the cow family. So, and these pronghorn are really not antelope. Why do we call them antelope and call them antelope hunting districts? That goes back to some things that were in statute years ago. We just never got around to changing it. We kind of went with the colloquial and we just never changed it, so. All right, there are some really good books if you do want to geek out on pronghorn, and I have two on the back table. This one, American Pronghorn. John Byers did a long-term study on the pronghorn population at the bison range, Nelson Bison Range. That's a really unique system because it's a large, intact ecosystem, but it's all enclosed, and so you can know every individual within that fence. And he basically spent 15 years or so doing all sorts of studies on that pronghorn population. And so a lot of interesting stuff there if you want to know about their social structure and everything. But he also spent a lot of time kind of talking about the prehistorical record of it. And I have that book back there, along with this book, which is more of a kind of book that sits on a biologist shelf, Ecology and Management, Bart O'Gara and Jim Yoakum. Jim was with Arizona Fish and Game, and I can't remember where Bart was associated with. I think he was mostly with the University of Montana and was a wildlife professor there, but two really strong pioneers in the world. And they put together a really great book. And then Dan Flores is a archaeologist and anthropologist from University of Montana. And he has a really good, he's written several books about the wildlife in the West back in prehistoric times, and he has some really good podcasts too, and the one on pronghorn is really interesting. So if you just Google Dan Flores and pronghorn, you'll find it, so. Okay. All right, they are fastest, second fastest land mammal, cheetah is fastest, but I'm sure you all have seen them running. I mean, it's kind of, they run because they can, which is, it's just fun to watch them run. We're gonna go to the next slide and talk about some of those features. So one thing that makes them a little bit different than other ungulates, they have all, their leg bones are fused. They don't have those dew claws like other ungulates have, which are the vestigial toes. Those bones are all fused, so it makes for a stronger leg, even though they're dainty looking, they're actually pretty strong. They have padded hooves, so that gives them better gripping, more surface area. They have, for their body size, large lungs, trachea, and heart, so they can take in all that air, they can process the oxygen, they can get it, the blood pumped through. And so that all adds to their ability to run fast. Their molars continuously erupt for their whole life. So like a beaver or a rodent, how their front incisors erupt continuously, so do the molars on the pronghorn, which is one reason why we can't age them like we do deer and elk. If you come to the check station, I'll cut open the cheek on a deer or your elk, and I'll look at the wear pattern on the molars, and I could give you a field estimate of how old. But with these animals, those teeth constantly are erupting and getting, and it makes sense because they are grass eaters, they're herbivores, they're eating on shrubs as well, and, you know, picking up dirt with their bites of food, and so their molars would really wear down, so. Yeah,
So are they always just wearing them down and they're continuing to grow, or are
They
they
just continue
losing
to
them and
grow.
growing new ones?
no, they're just,
Okay.
the same teeth are continuing to grow.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then this hollow hair, if you see them standing out there in the winter time and you think, how the heck can they ever keep warm? Well, their hair is actually hollow, so it's just like each little hair is a little insulator. Because that air inside will heat up, and so, and each, at the base of each hair is a little muscle, and so they could, you know, kind of fluff all up. And that action of those little muscles making their hair erect helps keep them warm too. And then the sheaths on the horns shed, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but I'll just pull this out. So, yeah. Especially if they're out there in a week or so and you're hunting antelope and you get a buck and you go to drag it, and then whoop, the sheets come off in your hands. So if you go to the next slide, please. So they actually are horned animals, just like a bighorn sheep is a horned animal. But unlike a bighorn sheep, the antelope or the pronghorn, they will shed these sheaths every year. Where bighorn will keep that sheath for its whole entire life. The only time this sheath is coming off is after all the hair and the skin have, tissue has degraded after they've died, and it comes off. But with the pronghorn, they will actually grow the sheath every year, so both are made of keratin. This is like a hard keratin, where this is a lot softer, and there's actually a lot of hair that kind of gets woven into it. So if you want to take a look at that. When these fall off, if you find remnants of them out on the ground, they'll turn red as they're exposed to the sun. And they're actually a really good source of minerals for rodents and things. You hardly ever find a sheep just laying there. It will always have been gnawed. Same thing with velvet. Like if you ever are looking at the base of trees that have been rubbed, you'll never find the velvet there. It gets eaten up so quickly, it's just so filled with nutrients. And I tested that with my dog one time. I had to fight to get the velvet out of her mouth. There's something about it, just loves it, so.
What
Okay.
time of year do they shed the?
So they're gonna shed, like, they're just coming off of the breeding season now. and then they shed. So they're often loose during hunting season, when people go to grab and drag. And right behind it is the new sheep growing, but it's, you know, because it's a living growing tissue, it's really there's a lot of blood vessels, and so it's kind of squishy until it hardens.
But they don't rub.
They don't rub, no.
I think you could see blood on it or something.
But when that comes off, like if you just harvested a buck and you pull that, the sheath that's coming off, it'll be just like bloody, liquidy underneath there, kind of gelatinous a little bit. You know, because it's just that new sheath growing, and there's a lot of blood vessels.
The new sheet pushes the old one off.
Yeah, exactly, and then it hardens just like that. Okay.
That's, I assume that sheet grows throughout the winter.
Yes, as it gets, you know, as they're eating, because, you know, when it first, like, it doesn't have the prong necessarily when it first comes out, and then it starts to come out. Okay, and then just kind of very simple terms, their diet. In the winter, it's a lot of shrubs, and depending on the system, could be sagebrush or rabbit brush or greasewood, just depending on where they're at. In the spring, like all the other ungulates, they take advantage of that fresh grass coming through with flushing nutrients, and in the summer, they're switching more to the flowering plants, the forbs. So just very basic diet stuff there. Hannah, can I have a, thank you. Okay, I said they're gregarious. Another term that often gets used with them is that they practice what's called the selfish herd. So each one of these animals knows that their safety is dependent upon being in the group with all the others, and so sometimes you'll see it written in books as the selfish herd syndrome that they have, where they just take advantage of all the others around them to protect themselves. And in Byers' book, he talks about some social structure hierarchy, where the younger will get pushed out to the sides, to the outside, the older ones stay in the middle. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting to me with the pronghorn reproduction. So they're in the breeding season right now, they'll be coming up shortly. They have a very long gestation. For how small they are, they actually, their gestation is 250 days. So basically June 1st is the birth date, so 9 months. For a small critter, I mean, think about that with humans, and so they typically will give birth to twins, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit further. 98% of the pregnancies typically are twins. The newborns are precocial. That just means that this one can jump up and run with its mom if it needed to. They're ready to run when they hit the ground. The newborn twins, they're typically about 20% of the mom's weight. So they might be 5 to 9 pounds per twin, per newborn. And then a mom is 75 to 100 pounds. Human twins are generally 10% of the mom's weight. So that pronghorn doe is carrying a lot of weight relative to her body size. And carrying it for a while too. Of course, not that full weight, but yeah.
Do the pronghorns use their antlers to fight other males, or?
Yes.
They do.
Yeah, the bucks will. I should have pointed that. That's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. The does typically will have shorter horns and not pronged. It's usually just a single. So the does won't use it as much, but the bucks will use those hooks as a defense and. Yeah. Okay. All right. So first thing, this kind of blows my mind. Are super ovulators. That means that they release more eggs than a fetus that will develop. So there might be 5 to 12 eggs that get fertilized, but obviously not all of those eggs will make it. So of those, more than 4 eggs that get fertilized are kind of floating around. Here's a picture of a uterus from a pronghorn. This is the cervix. Unlike other mammals, they actually have a double horned uterus. So other mammals will just have a single, it won't be that side. So they have a lot of eggs that get fertilized, then they have a double horned uterus. There's actually 4 sites in the uterus that a fertilized egg will implant, and that's where these X's are. So in each horn, you have a proximal implantation site and you have a distal one. The proximal one is closer to the cervix, and then distal one is out at the end of the uterine horn. What happens is, of all those fertilized eggs are kind of floating around for the first 30 days or so after impregnation, then 4 of them will implant in those sites. And then those fertilized eggs will start to develop and grow. And the ones that are at these distal implantation sites, they usually will get more of the nutrition quicker and grow bigger faster. And they'll start to grow this little tail out of one end. And the tissue at the end of that tail is often like necrotic and dead cells. So it's kind of spiky, if you will. And what it will do, these are 2 blastocysts, fertilized eggs, let's just say that were pulled from the uterine horn. So this one was in this proximal chamber, and this one was out in the distal chamber. They just took them out of the uterus for this picture. And so this little tail will eventually connect with this. So you have 2 fertilized eggs. This tail will connect with this fertilized egg and will actually push it out. So this one is all the way at the end. And so that's how you don't have quadruplets born every year. You have twins, because these blastocysts or these fertilized eggs will actually kill the other one in that uterine horn. So you've got one here, you've got one here. This one grows a tail with a point on it and intercepts that one and pushes it right out the end of the uterus. And so then you end up with a fetus developing just one in each of those uterine horns. I don't know of any other animal that does that. So, and maybe it's, from a holdout from, the days gone by where having multiple eggs was kind of an insurance or something. No one seems to know that one, but anyway.
They do have triplets occasionally.
They could have triplets occasionally, and they also, there's been, when I was looking through the literature, there were some cases where researchers were going in on birth sites, and they would find kind of a Frankenstein triplet. So this one didn't get pushed all the way out, and it partially developed, so it might be a bunch of long hair and teeth, but nothing else. And yeah, so I don't know what the dynamics would be of healthy triplets if for some reason one actually did develop there.
Occasionally you'll see a doe with 3.
Right, right. Yeah, so anyway, it's pretty interesting. Okay.
Do they take on other fawns, or if you see 3, that's?
It could be either one.
Okay.
They could have adopted one who's, for some reason got kicked off its mother, or mother died, or, yeah. Okay, so there's sex ratios when they give birth to fawns, or just in general. In utero and right at birth, the sex ratio is generally 1 male, 1 female. This is not, why I put this here, not older fawns, is because if we are looking at fawns that are a month old and looking at their sex ratio, there could be a bias in there that the males are more apt to, wander farther from their mom and get picked off by a coyote. So that has a little bit of a bias, but if you're looking at just in the lab and you had necropsies, it's generally a 1-to-1 male female as far as the fetuses. So. And then there is some Byers study that the social rank of the mom might affect the birth sex ratio. That subordinate does will give birth to daughters and dominant does give birth to sons, but that's the only study that I saw that had that. And I should clarify that this doesn't indicate that 1 male or 1 twin will be male, 1 will be female. It just means of all the fawns that are born that year, generally it's going to be happening. All right. Okay, here's another thing that's interesting, and I'm sure this happens in a lot of a lot of ungulates, but a pregnant female, knowing what we know from the previous slides, that she has twins, they are growing and they're growing to, up to 20% of her own body weight. In the winter time, especially late winter, if it's a hard, cold, deep snow, a lot of effort having to go into securing calories, that mom is gonna struggle to maintain healthy fetuses there. So her condition is heavily influenced by what the prior summer vegetation and fall vegetation was. So how fit was she going into the breeding period, and then how fit was she going into the winter period? If her body starts to be depleted of nutrients, the body will break down her own fat and protein first. And then if the release on starvation doesn't occur, body will start to absorb those fetuses and abort them. And depending on how old or how far into gestation, how far that fetus has developed, the soft tissue will get reabsorbed into the body. But if you're in the late trimester and there's already little hooves and there's bones and there's teeth, those hard tissues may not get absorbed and they'll have to be expelled. And in some cases, the female will not, her body won't expel those. And so those bones could actually become like intrauterine devices. And so then she becomes barren for the remainder of her life. So, and the next picture I'm gonna warn you is, it's one of these photos, but it's in color. So if you're queasy, which I doubt anybody in this room is. But here's a case, Julie Cunningham, who's the biologist over in the Gallatin, Madison. She had a necropsy on a doe, and that's what was happening. The fetuses were being absorbed by the mother's body. Okay. But you can see, I mean, at this point in the gestation, there's a skull already there, and the body can't absorb bone. So either that gets expelled or it becomes a blockage. All right, so that's all lead in to the big bull population and the numbers that I've been seeing there. So what I have on this graph is counts from my flights from 2013 through this summer. In 21, we weren't able to complete the flight, so that's why there's a big gap here, which is unfortunate because it really would be interesting to know how to connect these two pieces. So the black line represents the total number of animals Pronghorn counted. The orange are the does, the green a number of fawns, and then the bucks. The dotted lines are just the trend over those 12 years based on the numbers counted. A couple of things to note here is I'm flying every other year. So what's happening in 2024? What's happening in 2022? And then the other thing is Pronghorn, because of where they live and they're, they winter on open prairies generally, they are susceptible to some very major die-offs from time to time if there is a severe winter. That could really drop the population. So anyway, just in general, 2015, counting about 800. This year, counting just over 400. So what's been happening that I'm seeing half the numbers that I have been. So I just kind of geeked out on that question for a little bit. And so the next several slides are going to be my trains of thought on trying to understand the dynamics of this population. So the first thing I looked at is harvest driving that decline that we've been seeing. And again, the way to read the graph is this is the total number of antelope harvested. The blue line is broken down to bucks and the orange line of does. And then these dashed lines are the number of either sex licenses that are offered and the number of doe fawn licenses that are offered. So this decline is management decisions being made as I'm seeing less pronghorn on the landscape, offering less licenses. One of the things to take home from this is the number of licenses offered relative to what's actually harvested on those licenses. You look at and this is just going back to 2020. Prior to that, during that 2007 to 2020 period, when Craig and I had combined those two districts into one, the harvest was collected in a way that I couldn't tease out what harvest had come from just Unit 318. So that's why I didn't include that here. But anyway, the long-term average success on those either sex licenses, even though we had 175 in that area being offered, the percentage of harvest success is 27 on the either sex licenses. And of those either sex tags, 79% are getting filled with bucks. So the first thing somebody might say is, well, gosh, you got all those either sex tags out there and 175, you're losing 175 pronghorn. But really, you're not, because not everyone gets filled. And then there's 21% harvest success on the doe fawn license. So that's kind of telling me something, but I don't think that it's been driving the whole population. And again, it's just from 2020, so I just kind of keep that in the back of my mind that, okay, there's some impact to harvest for sure, but is that everything? So then I just started asking some questions and trying to get the data to see what the data says on that. So I was thinking about the winter of 22-23, that spring, that late winter in 23, the snow just continued. We had heavy snow, cold temperatures. And I saw low fawn recruitment that year. So I started thinking, okay, is there something there? Is that a case where a lot of those does did abort fetuses? And as reflected by the lowest number of fawns relative to 100 does that I saw in the past 12 years. So then I just kept going with that. So I started asking some questions about if we had good growing conditions the prior summer, so that doe was in good shape, how does that impact the fawn production that I see the following year? So let's just take a look at this one. So here's my fawn doe ratio in 2021. I use the information from the Dark Horse site from the USDA. Help me out with this. You might know what NWCC, National Weather.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, all the weather data came from the Dark Horse station. I figured that was probably most better than using the Calvert Creek, and that was would most reflect conditions that these pronghorn are dealing with. So anyway, I looked at the June through August incremental precipitation. So how much rain did we get June, July, August? And I looked at, so the previous year, then if I had a spike in the amount of rainfall the previous summer, which in my mind then would equate to good growing conditions and then good feed. What did I see with the doe fawn ratios the next year? So in 2020, we had a really nice wet summer, it looked like. And then I had a nice spike in that doe fawn. In 2022, it looks like we were more in a drought. And then lo and behold, that was my low fawn doe ratio. This is just one piece of a bigger puzzle for sure. And it doesn't always hold. You know, a nice spike in the previous summer moisture, a good fawn recruitment the next year. A drought, but a decent fawn recruitment. So it's not the whole story, but it just gives me some enlightenment as to what might be going on there. So then I asked the next question of when we have cold, wet Junes, how does that impact the number of fawns that I'm seeing in July, a month later? So I'm not worrying about the previous summer and its impact on the fitness of the doe. But how do cold, wet Junes impact the fawn survival for that year? Because as I said, most of the fawns are born June 1st around that area, and I'm counting those 6 weeks later. So the way to read this graph is these are the number of fawns per 100 does. everything's on the same scale here. The red bars is the June incremental precipitation. And then the green line is the June average temperature in Fahrenheit. So what I looked at here is if we have a cold June with a lot of precip, and I'm gonna assume if the temperatures are cold, that precip was coming in the form of snow often, that probably was gonna do a number on the ponds that year. So where I have lowest temperatures and a lot of precip, how does that relate to the number of ponds that I was seeing? And here's 2023 in particular. We had decent precip in June. It was one of the lowest average temperatures as recorded over the past 10 years. And that was my lowest Fondo ratio. You know, here we had a relatively dry June and one of the warmer temperatures and a good Fondo ratio. But it doesn't hold. So again, none of this is like, the smoking gun, but it's all telling me some bits of information. Okay, and then the last thing I looked at was the buck segment of the population. And there's been this really interesting study that was done in Yellowstone where they looked at wolf winter diets in Yellowstone. And they equated it back to fall precipitation. And the theory behind that was if there was good precip in the fall and a potential for a second green up with the vegetation, then bull elk coming out of the rut can regain some of their strength and fitness going into the winter. And when there was that nice fall rain, then the bulls were too strong for wolves to go after, so the wolves would prey on the and in those winter, or in those falls where there wasn't a lot of precip, the bulls weren't able to regain their fitness, and so it made them more susceptible to predation by wolves. And in those winters, the wolf diet was made up mostly of bull elk. So I thought, I wonder if there's something to that as far as the number of bucks that I'm counting. And so I looked at previous precip in October of November relative to the number of bucks that I counted the following summer. And again, it's messy, it's not entirely, so, you know, I use this scale for the October, November precip in inches. You know, so we had maybe 6 inches and I had a decent buck count the next year. There was a lot of rain in 2022 relative to, 8 inches of moisture in those 2 months. And I had a little buck count. So it's not, again, it's not perfect, but it's more just kind of show you some of the things that I was thinking about, so. Okay. So what is driving this downward trend? I don't have a clean answer for you. What I do know is weather definitely has a role to play in it, and I can't control that unless maybe we could do some cloud seeding or something when we need it. But also just for the time being, just keeping the number of either sex licenses and the Dauphin licenses low because they do give birth to twins most of the time. Even though Pronghorn can have these large impact events with a heavy cold winter, they can also rebound quicker than other critters. It's not unlike white-tailed deer. They can rebound a lot quicker than a mule deer because whitetail will often give birth to twins or triplets even. So it's just something to watch over the next several years and just keep the harvest rate, which is what I could control, keep that low and then just see if those, and the pronghorn population can rebound and probably will. And I was gonna mention too, this year we did see in other parts of Montana episodes of that epizootic hemorrhagic disease, EHD, which also called blue tongue, and that can affect pronghorn. We have not seen any evidence of it here in Montana, or here in Southwest Montana. So I don't think that's a driver here, but anyway. That's, again, just I don't have any strong conclusions, but just more kind of give you some background information on how I think about these things, so. Yeah, and that last picture, Jim McLucas had been one of the main trappers of all kinds of critters for the state of Montana. He was from Butte. And he probably was responsible for the majority of the trap and transplant operations that we had to repopulate wildlife populations in Montana. So I'd like to put that picture up. We actually did transplant pronghorn back in the 70s, so, yeah. All right, that's all I got for you.
Ben, how much did I-15 and 16 affect the migration of the animal?
I think I-15 probably affected it down in the Dillon. I think there's, and into Idaho too. Because Jesse and I meet with the Idaho biologists and compare notes, and that's something that they talked about too, that has really blocked migration east-west.
What's huge in Idaho, because they
Yeah.
blocked off that desert,
Yeah, exactly.
and then they lay in the train track.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I don't know, Tana, if you could go to that second slide that shows the maps, third slide. Yes. When it has all the pronghorn movement, but in Horse Prairie, Highway 324. So that fence line has been shown to be a barrier between the Montana and Idaho pronghorn. So that portion of the wintering herd on Horse Prairie that stays year round. There's another segment of pronghorn that come up from like the Snake River Plain in Idaho, and they'll just butt up against that fence with each other. But I just talked with Colin Peterson, who's doing a lot, he works for the National Wildlife Federation and doing a lot of fence removal and modification project. And one of the major landowners there is going to do some major openings and modifications. A lot of that country, as you know, is like old page wire. And it's just, yeah. So, yeah, so down in this country, yeah, this fence, I mean, you can see it's the barrier. There's no movement of these pronghorn south. And then Idaho had collared some pronghorn and they came up to this fence line. So that's gonna be huge because that's when do you suppose those fences went in back in the 40s?
Probably.
Okay,
There's net wire for sheep.
yeah, so by punching some holes, which is gonna happen next year, hopefully that'll reconnect those two populations, which hasn't happened in 80 years, so that'd be good. Yeah.
Hey, Ben, the population downward trend, how much of it do you think is loss of habitat due to rural development?
Not much at all.
Really?
The big hole is awesome in that.
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, but I've noticed in the winter range, well, you mentioned my backyard, and there's been a lot of.
Yeah.
A lot of sheds and
Yeah, okay,
down
so,
fences and stuff like
right,
that.
so over in this country, there might be some of that.
Yeah.
And that's where Colin Peterson's really key to working with landowners on permitting, so, yeah. Yeah, but I don't see that being a key factor in any of that country up there. You had a question? Yeah.
Yeah, how much does that fence permeability, I mean, is that just forage availability is what the fencing affects? We're dealing with that a lot in Madison with ranch vets.
Right, because you've got similar data set there. I don't know if you're working with Julie on that. But it's both, so it's causing extra energy output to move, and then it's also preventative from getting to forage. So it just depends on where it's at, but it could be both. Yeah.
And maybe you guys have more connectivity here, but when you do get high densities of fencing, do you start to see, is that related pretty heavily to population decline or?
Well, it could, I mean, especially like, you know, winter range, especially if you get these awful storms and it just caves them up against the fence, because their inclination is to keep moving until they get to a more suitable place to be. And so if there's a winter storm pressing on them here and they just keep moving south, but if they run up against the fence, I mean, there's some awful pictures from Wyoming where that happens, and that could have a population impact for sure, yeah. Tom, did you?
If you have the wrong conditions, could you get enough does that lost their fetus, couldn't purge but, and you have
Right.
long-term sterility, would there be enough there to affect the?
Yeah, and both Jesse and I, because Jesse flew 329, we both observed groups of adult does with a buck, but no fawns. And we suspect those are probably bearing does, so until those does die out, they're not gonna be producing. Yeah, so I mean, if it happened to a large enough number, it certainly could have a population level impact. Yeah, it's getting late, so I won't belabor any points, but. Any other questions? All right, thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanna. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, that was so interesting.
Thanks, Vanna, you're awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pedro.
All right, so anybody else have anything they want to say before we tell you when the next meeting is and send you on your way? No? All right, well, thanks for coming so much tonight. The next meeting is November, I think it's the 19th. And it'll be at 6 p.m. when we go to our winter hours, and we'll be hearing about archaeological and cultural resources at the Elkhorn Mine and Mill. So that'll be another interesting topic. All right, and thank you so much, everybody, and drive safe.